For you're nothing without this family. The words were delivered calmly, almost politely, as if they were stating a fact rather than erasing a human being. She stood there in the living room that no longer felt like her home, holding a folder against her chest, listening as her brother-in-law straightened his tie and repeated it again, slower this time, so it would sink in. You're nothing without this family. No one interrupted him. Her sister looked away. Her nephew scrolled on his phone. The lawyer seated near the window pretended to review papers that had already been read twice, and she said nothing, not because she agreed, not because she was weak, but because she understood something they didn't. Silence, when chosen, can be dangerous. They had gathered that morning under the excuse of final arrangements. The phrase had been used so often over the past months that it had lost all meaning. Final arrangements for the estate, final arrangements for the company, final arrangements for what remained after her husband's death. What they didn't say out loud was simpler. They were arranging her disappearance. The house smelled of coffee and furniture polish, the kind of artificial cleanliness that tries to hide tension. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating framed family photos lining the walls. Photos where she stood slightly to the side, always present, never centered. She noticed that too. Her brother-in-law cleared his throat again. He liked hearing himself speak. We've discussed this already, he said, tapping the folder on the table. The assets remain under the family's management. You'll receive an allowance, enough to live comfortably. No stress, no responsibilities. Allowance. The word landed harder than the insult. Her husband had built that company from nothing. She had watched it grow from a cramped office with second-hand desks into a regional powerhouse. She had been there when the first contracts were signed, when the first employees were hired, when the first crisis nearly broke them. But none of that mattered now, because she wasn't loud, because she wasn't aggressive, because she didn't look like power, and because in their minds grief had made her fragile. You don't need to understand the details, her sister added quickly, as if softening the blow. It's all legal. The family council agrees. Family council. Another phrase that sounded official while meaning very little. She finally lifted her eyes. What exactly am I signing? She asked. Her voice was steady. That unsettled them more than anger would have. Her brother-in-law smiled, relieved. He gestured toward the lawyer. Just a formality, he said. A confirmation that you're stepping aside. Stepping aside, as if she'd merely been standing in the way. The lawyer slid a document across the table. Thick, official, covered in dense language designed to intimidate rather than inform. She glanced at it but didn't touch it. And if I don't? She asked. The room shifted. Her nephew stopped scrolling. Her sister's jaw tightened. The lawyer finally looked up. Her brother-in-law exhaled, slow and controlled. Then we'll have a problem, he said, because without this family, you have no standing, no authority, no claim. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You're nothing without this family. This time it wasn't calm, it was a warning. She nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement, because now the mask had slipped. They weren't trying to protect her. They were trying to erase her, and they believed they could. She picked up the document, not to sign it, to read it, and that surprised them. Her brother-in-law frowned. There's no need. I'd like to read what I'm giving up, she said. The lawyer hesitated, just a second too long. That was the first crack. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable, heavy with the unspoken fear that she might understand more than they wanted. She turned the pages slowly. Names, dates, asset transfers, corporate control clauses. She recognized every structure, not because she was trained in law, but because she had lived it, built it, protected it. Her finger stopped on one paragraph. She read it again, then once more. Interesting. She looked up. This says the board voted unanimously to remove me, she said. Her brother-in-law nodded eagerly. Exactly. When was that vote held? She asked. The lawyer answered too quickly. 2 weeks ago. She tilted her head slightly. I was never notified. That's because... Her sister started. Because I was hospitalized, she finished calmly. No one spoke. Her brother-in-law waved it off. It was an emergency meeting. And the bylaws allow emergency meetings without notifying the primary stakeholder, she asked. The lawyer shifted in his chair. That depends. She closed the folder. I see, she said. They relaxed. That was their mistake, because they thought I see meant surrender. What it meant was calculation. She placed the folder back on the table, perfectly aligned. "I won't sign this today," she said. Her brother-in-law's smile vanished. "You don't have a choice." She met his gaze. "Everyone always has a choice." He stood abruptly, towering over her. "You think you can fight us?" he snapped. "You think you can win? Without this family, you're nothing." The word nothing echoed in the room. She stood as well, not to challenge him, but to leave. "I'll be in touch," she said. Her sister scoffed. "With who? You don't even have representation." She paused at the door. That was when she smiled, just slightly. "I do," she said. And she left. Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner, as if the world itself had shifted. She didn't get into her car right away. She stood on the sidewalk, closed her eyes, and breathed. Because now the game had changed. They thought power came from bloodlines, from titles, from proximity. They had no idea what she was about to expose, and they had no idea how carefully she had prepared. Because silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's storage, and she had been storing the truth for a very long time. She didn't go home after leaving the house. That was the first decision that truly frightened them, though they wouldn't realize it until much later. Instead, she drove across town, past streets she used to know by heart, past offices that once bore her husband's name on brass plaques, past memories that no longer belonged to her. She parked in front of a building that looked unremarkable from the outside. No signage, no grandeur, just glass, steel, and quiet efficiency. Inside, a receptionist looked up. "I have an appointment," she said. "With whom?" She slid a card across the counter. The receptionist's expression changed instantly. "Of course," she said. "Please, this way." The room she was led into wasn't large, but it was precise. Clean lines, no family photos, no distractions. Just a long table, a screen on the wall, and two people already waiting. One of them stood the moment she entered. "Mrs. Hale," he said respectfully. The other remained seated, studying her with calm intensity. She hadn't told her family this part. She hadn't told anyone. But she had never been alone. Not really. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," she said. The man who had stood gestured toward a chair. "We've been expecting you." That was the second crack in the illusion her family had built. Because people with nothing aren't expected. They are dismissed. She sat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Your brother-in-law contacted us yesterday," the seated man said, "through intermediaries." She raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "He wanted confirmation," the man continued, "that the transfer documents would withstand scrutiny." She let out a soft breath. "So he was worried." The man nodded. "Very." Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable, but deliberate. Then she spoke. "They believe I don't know what I own." The man smiled faintly. "That's what they told us too." She leaned back. "And what do you know?" The man tapped the table once. The screen behind him flickered to life. Numbers appeared. Charts, names, corporate entities layered upon each other like a carefully constructed maze. "We know," he said calmly, "that your husband trusted you with more than anyone realized." Her chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. The man continued. "He placed assets under your name indirectly, shells beneath shells, not to hide them from you, but to protect them from everyone else." She closed her eyes for a brief moment. She remembered now. Late nights, quiet conversations, her husband's voice low, cautious. "If anything ever happens, listen more than you speak." She opened her eyes. "They never bothered to look," she said. "No," the man agreed. "They assumed. That assumption would cost them everything." Over the next 2 hours, they walked her through the truth her family had never suspected. The board vote that had removed her? Illegitimate? The emergency meeting? Unlawful? The transfer clauses buried in the document she had been asked to sign? Trigger mechanisms designed to activate protections, not surrender. The lawyer her family had brought? Compromised. She absorbed it all in silence, not shock, recognition, because she had sensed it for years. The subtle tension when contracts were signed. The way her husband insisted she be present for decisions others thought didn't concern her. The quiet moments when he tested loyalty, hers and theirs. "They thought you were irrelevant," the man said gently. "That's why they failed." She stood. "What happens next?" she asked. The man met her gaze. "That depends," he said. "How visible do you want this to be?" She didn't answer immediately. She thought of the living room, the smug smile, the word, nothing. She thought of the photos on the wall, how she had always been positioned just slightly out of frame. "I want it public," she said, "but not dramatic." The man nodded. "Then the truth will speak for itself." 2 days later, her family received a notice. Not from her, from the council. A formal summons, mandatory attendance, review of governance procedures. They laughed. Her brother-in-law waved it away at dinner. "Routine," he said. "Someone probably complained." Her sister nodded. "Probably her." That made them laugh harder. "She won't show," her nephew added. "She never does." That was their third mistake, because she did show. The council chamber was larger than the living room she'd been dismissed in. High ceilings, rows of seats, a raised dais where authority sat in silence waiting. Her family arrived early, confident, well-dressed. Her brother-in-law shook hands with familiar faces. The lawyer whispered reassurances. Everything was under control, until she entered. Heads turned. Whispers spread. She walked slowly, deliberately, taking a seat near the front, alone. That unsettled them. Her sister leaned toward her brother-in-law. "Why is she here?" He frowned. "Probably to embarrass herself." The council chair called the session to order. "Today," he announced, "we review allegations concerning governance violations, asset misrepresentation, and unlawful removal of authority." Her brother-in-law sat straighter. The lawyer adjusted his tie. She remained still. Names were read, documents referenced, procedures questioned. At first it all felt abstract, technical, boring. That was intentional, because boredom lowers defenses. Then the chair looked up. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "You were invited to observe." She stood. "Yes. And do you wish to speak?" Her brother-in-law smirked. The chair raised a hand. "Not yet," he said. "First we will hear from the Financial Oversight Committee." The man from the glass building stood, introduced himself, and began. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply presented facts, votes held without quorum, assets moved without authorization, legal counsel operating with conflicts of interest. The room grew quiet. Her brother-in-law's confidence began to fracture. "This is absurd," he muttered. Then came the records, projected onto the screen. Names, dates, transfers. The chair leaned forward. "These accounts," he said slowly, "are under whose control?" The oversight man didn't look at her family. He looked at her. "Mrs. Hale's," he said. Silence fell like a dropped glass. Her sister's face drained of color. The lawyer froze. Her brother-in-law stood abruptly. "That's impossible," he snapped. "She doesn't even know—" The chair cut him off. "She knows," he said. And then he turned to her. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "would you care to clarify?" She stepped forward. This time she didn't smile. And as she opened her mouth to speak, the room realized something too late. They hadn't silenced her. They had given her the stage. She didn't rush. That was the detail no one expected. When she stepped forward, the room was already tense, breath held, eyes fixed, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone was waiting for either an apology or a mistake, something emotional, something defensive. They had underestimated her again. She placed both hands on the table in front of the council, steady and composed, and looked directly at the chair. "Yes," she said calmly, "I would like to clarify." Her brother-in-law shifted in his seat. The sound of it echoed louder than it should have. She began without raising her voice. "For the past 18 years," she said, "I have been listed as a secondary beneficiary in public documents. That was intentional." Murmurs rippled through the room. She continued. "My husband understood that visibility attracts interference, so while others managed appearances, I managed continuity." Her sister stared at her as if seeing a stranger. The Oversight Committee member nodded once, almost imperceptibly. She turned slightly, addressing the room now. "The accounts you've just seen are not new. They were established over a decade ago, each one layered beneath another, each with specific conditions that only activate under certain violations." Her brother-in-law leaned forward, panic creeping into his voice. "This is misleading," he said sharply. "She's trying to confuse the council." The chair raised a hand. "Let her finish." That sentence alone shifted the balance of power. She inhaled slowly. 2 months ago," she said, "those conditions were triggered." The lawyer beside her brother-in-law stiffened. She glanced in his direction. "The emergency board meeting," she continued, "was held without lawful notice. That action automatically transferred controlling authority from the board to the protected beneficiary." She paused. That beneficiary is me. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Chairs scraped. Someone laughed nervously, as if this had to be a misunderstanding. Her brother-in-law stood again. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "She has no right." The chair struck the gavel once. "Sit down," he ordered. Her brother-in-law froze. He had never been spoken to like that before. She resumed. "The moment that vote was conducted," she said, "every attempt to remove me became evidence." She gestured toward the screen. "Those documents you believed would erase me," she said evenly, did the opposite. The Oversight Committee member stepped forward again. "We can confirm," he said, "that all attempted transfers since the emergency meeting have been flagged and recorded." Her sister's hands trembled. "That includes," he added, "communications." The lawyer swallowed hard. The chair turned to him. "Counsel," he said, "were you aware of these conditions?" The lawyer hesitated. That hesitation was fatal. "I was not fully informed," he said carefully. The chair raised an eyebrow. "Were you retained by the family?" "Yes." "And paid?" "Yes." "And did you advise them to proceed with the vote?" Another pause. "Yes." The chair nodded slowly. "Then you were fully informed enough." The lawyer said nothing. She spoke again. "I didn't come here to reclaim power," she said. "I already have it." That landed harder than any accusation. "I came here," she continued, "because I was told I was nothing without this family." Her brother-in-law laughed bitterly. "You still need us," he snapped. "You wouldn't even be here without—" She turned to face him directly. "No," she said, "you wouldn't be here without me." Silence fell. She reached into her bag and removed a thin folder. Not thick, not dramatic, precise. "These are internal authorizations," she said, handing copies to the council clerk. "Signed by my husband. Dated years ago." The chair reviewed the first page. His expression changed. "These signatures," he said, "grant unilateral authority under breach conditions." She nodded. "Conditions you violated." Her brother-in-law shook his head. "This is manipulation," he said weakly. "She's twisting—" The Oversight Committee member interrupted him. "Sir," he said, "your accounts have been frozen." The words hung in the air, frozen. Her sister gasped. "That's impossible," her brother-in-law said. The committee member met his gaze. "It happened 30 minutes ago." He looked around wildly. "You can't do this," he said. "This family, this company—" She interrupted him for the first time. "You don't own it," she said quietly. That broke him. "This is betrayal," he shouted. "After everything we did for you." She tilted her head. "You took," she said. "You never gave." The chair cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "what outcome are you seeking today?" She turned back toward him. "Transparency," she said. "And correction." The chair nodded. "Proceed." She exhaled once. "First," she said, "the board vote is nullified." The Oversight Committee confirmed it. "Second," she continued, "the family council is dissolved." A murmur spread. "Third," she said, "an independent audit is initiated, covering the last 5 years." Her brother-in-law's face went pale. "And finally," she said, "all legal representation involved in this attempted removal is reviewed for misconduct." The lawyer stood abruptly. "I object." The chair silenced him. "You may submit a statement," he said coldly. "Later," she finished calmly. "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm informing." The chair leaned back. "So noted." The gavel struck again. Session adjourned. But no one moved. Her family sat frozen, stunned, exposed. As people began to file out, whispers filled the room. Her sister tried to speak. She didn't listen. Her brother-in-law stared at her as if she had destroyed something sacred. She met his gaze. "You told me I was nothing without this family," she said softly. "Now, you know the truth." She turned and walked away. Not fast, not triumphant, just certain. Behind her, everything began to collapse. Outside the chamber, cameras waited. Journalists had been tipped off, not by her, but by the inevitable leak of panic. A microphone was thrust toward her. "Mrs. Hale," a reporter asked, "is it true you've taken control of the estate?" She paused. "I never lost it," she said. That clip would run everywhere, and for the first time her silence spoke louder than any family name. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It unfolded in layers. The first came quietly within hours of the hearing. Emails stopped being answered. Phones rang without response. Accounts that had once moved freely froze mid-transaction, leaving numbers suspended like unfinished sentences. The family name, once spoken with certainty, began to hesitate on people's tongues. She did not stay to watch it happen. She returned to the house she had been told was no longer hers. The locks opened without resistance. Inside, everything was exactly as she had left it, the furniture arranged with care. The photographs still on the walls, some featuring faces that now avoided cameras, others showing a man who had understood the value of preparation. She stood in the entryway for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. For years, silence had been imposed on her. Now it belonged to her. The second wave came publicly. By morning, headlines began to surface. Board vote nullified, amid allegations of internal misconduct. Estate authority reverts to protected beneficiary. Family council dissolved. Following oversight review, names were mentioned cautiously at first, then less so. Her brother-in-law's face appeared on screens, cropped from old galas and charity events. Analysts spoke in measured tones, dissecting decisions that now looked reckless rather than strategic. One anchor paused mid-segment. "This case," she said, "raises serious questions about how power is assumed and how easily silence is mistaken for weakness." That phrase repeated itself across platforms. Silence mistaken for weakness. Her sister released a statement by midday. It spoke of misunderstandings, of grief, of family matters taken out of context. No one believed it. The Oversight Committee confirmed the audit publicly that afternoon. 5 years of financial behavior would be reviewed. Every transfer, every authorization, every attempt to bypass protocol. The family lawyer resigned before sunset. The third wave came internally. Late that evening, her phone rang. She did not answer it. It rang again. She watched the screen light up with a name she had not seen in months. Her brother-in-law. She let it go to voicemail. The message came through seconds later. His voice sounded unfamiliar, strained, rushed, stripped of its usual authority. "This has gone too far," he said. "You need to call me back. We can fix this. We're still family." She deleted it without listening to the rest. Minutes later, another call. Then another message. "We can negotiate," he said. "You don't want this kind of attention." She smiled faintly. He still thought attention was something she feared. Days passed. The house remained quiet. She moved through it deliberately, reclaiming rooms that had once felt temporary. In the study, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were folders, neatly labeled in her husband's handwriting. Each one represented foresight. She sat at the desk and opened the first. More documents, more layers. He had not trusted the family, he had trusted her. The realization settled deeply, not as vindication but as responsibility. She closed the folder. At the end of the week, the audit released its preliminary findings. They were devastating. Unauthorized meetings, conflicts of interest, attempts to reassign authority under the guise of emergency governance. The Oversight Committee issued a formal statement. Multiple violations of fiduciary duty have been identified. Her brother-in-law's name appeared more than once. So did her sister's. The council members who had laughed at her absence were now distancing themselves publicly, issuing clarifications, explanations, apologies. Too late. The board was restructured within 48 hours. Independent directors were appointed. Her position was confirmed, unanimously. She did not attend the announcement. She watched it from her living room, seated calmly, a cup of tea cooling beside her. The fourth wave came privately and painfully. Her sister arrived unannounced the following Sunday. She stood at the door, smaller than she remembered. "You didn't answer my messages," her sister said. She stepped aside to let her in. They sat across from each other in the living room, the space between them heavy with years of unspoken resentment. "You humiliated us," her sister said quietly. She met her gaze. "You humiliated yourselves," she replied. Her sister looked down. "We thought you'd disappear," she admitted. "After he died, we thought you wouldn't fight." She nodded once. "You were wrong." Tears welled in her sister's eyes. "You didn't have to destroy everything." She leaned back slightly. "I didn't destroy it," she said. "I exposed it." Silence followed. Her sister stood a few minutes later. As she reached the door, she paused. "We never really knew you," she said. She answered calmly, "You never tried." The door closed behind her. The fifth wave came months later. By then, the story had evolved. It was no longer about a family dispute. It had become a case study. Universities discussed it in ethics classes. Analysts cited it when speaking about governance failures. Articles referenced the importance of protective clauses and quiet authority. Her name appeared in headlines less frequently now. When it did, it was measured. Estate stabilized under new leadership. Protected beneficiary rebuilds institutional trust. She declined interviews. She did not need to explain herself. Her actions had already done that. One afternoon she stood in the courtroom again. This time it was empty. The final hearing had concluded hours earlier. Judgments had been issued, penalties assigned, restrictions enforced. The family name would not disappear, but it would never carry the same weight. She walked slowly to the front of the chamber, standing where she had once been told she had no right to speak. The memory felt distant now. She closed her eyes briefly, then she turned and left. The epilogue unfolded quietly. A year later, the estate was stable, transparent, stronger than before. She appointed leaders who valued structure over spectacle. The board meetings were efficient, respectful. No one interrupted her when she spoke. No one laughed. On the anniversary of her husband's passing, she visited the place where his name was engraved. Not on a monument, but on a document. She traced the letters lightly. He had known. He had prepared. She whispered a thank you, not for the power, but for the trust. As she walked away, her phone vibrated with a message. Audit complete. All matters resolved. She typed a brief response. Acknowledged. Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket and continued forward. She had been told she was nothing without that family. They had believed it, until the truth appeared, and by the time it did, it was already too late to stop her. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you that silence can be strategy and truth always finds its moment, subscribe for stories where power is underestimated and justice speaks last.